Mountaintop listener eavesdrops on the Axis. The most unusual radio character to turn up in some time is Siegfried Wagner, who conducts WOL Mutual's an analysis of propaganda. Not content to follow the run-of-the-mill type commentator, Wagner performs a rather unique service to the country. Sitting high atop the Colorado mountains in his one-man listening post, he listens to and then analyzes for broadcasting to the American listeners the propaganda which is being shortwaved by the Axis nations. Wagner claims to have given up superstitions more than 16 years ago. On Friday the 13th, January 1926, please note that the 26th is the sum of two 13s. He boarded the SS Stuttgart, at that time the 13th largest German mercenary ship, and sailed to America. And it's 2013. And we saw lots of 9-4s today. That's an inside story. He boarded the SS Stuttgart, at that time the 13th largest German mercenary ship, and sailed to America. He has been there ever since. He never expects to see the Germany again, and unlike many naturalized German Americans, he never wants to. Wagner loves America because the West symbolized to him the freedom that this country offers. He has settled there. High in the mountains of Colorado, he has a 320-acre ranch. The ranch is in mountain land, mostly pasture land and scenery. Although he travels all over Europe, Wagner feels that none of Europe could hold a candle to the natural beauty of this country. Woolen clothes included in heavy checkered shirt, chaps, are de rigueur for Wagner since his ranch is over 8,000 feet above sea level. His chief aversion is to money. So he doesn't like money. He never carries any in his pockets, he just doesn't like it there. Don't get any ideas, however, that Wagner is another Thoreau. A checkbook is his constant companion. He is a justice of the peace. In addition to his radio chores, Wagner is also justice of the peace for his region, and as such he recently cleared the surrounding countryside of cabin burglars. He still carries his trusty .38 Colt pistol, takes no stock in fancy duds, and wears Western clothes all the time. As a protest against the European habit of dressing like a dude, Wall Streeter. He started analyzing shortwave propaganda in January 1939, and in March of 1941 he was picked by Mutual and began broadcasting his analysis all over this network. His broadcast from Estes Park, Colorado, from a special studio at the Baldplay Inn. Axis propaganda says Wagner is squarely on the defensive. Goebbels does not dare bleat when the RAF has dumped millions of pounds of high explosives in a single night, because the people of bombed German cities know worse facts than Goebbels elects to tell them, and they expect still worse to come. Japs fear the air power. Japan is much more concerned about the enormously growing air power of the United Nations than are her Axis partners. The Japanese radio, Wagner reports, has yet to mention the large-scale bombings of Cologne, as seen in Bremen and by the RAF, not even daring to report the silly Nazi version which tells the world that nothing really serious happened in Cologne. But his ranching activities and his attention to shortwave do not take all of Wagner's time. He makes the most of what his leisure hours are his. He paints, uses oils and watercolors and pastels as his media. And an accomplished guitarist, he plays Western songs of his own composition. On the intellectual side, his main interests are anthropology, American history, and philosophy. During the First World War, Wagner was in the German army, and as he maintains, he became a good pig. Starved while in the German forces, he can now sustain himself on practically any food at any moment, and his presence now that he can is to eat everything in sight. I guess that's one way to get back at it. Dogs guard his premises. Wagner owns 2 Belgian Shepherd dogs, big animals whom are kind to all visitors but firm. The dogs are watchful eye on the 2 ancient, unexplored, unidentified graves that are in Wagner's front yard. Really? Wagner has an old skull which he uncovered in a mountain cabin, which he affectionately calls Uncle Pete. While he listens to the Axis propaganda over the short waves, Wagner takes it apart as he listens, analyzing, spotting the weakness, whether they be glaring or subtle. From the propaganda he hears, he formulates his theories on the state of the war and internal conditions of the nations involved. Most theories, however, come, not from what he hears, but what he does not hear. The facts behind the trends in the propaganda. Reading between the lines. Here you go. From Herb Trackman's candid radio column Mike Shots, which appears in the Monitor, we've clipped the items on the opposite page. The Monitor is Denver's weekly family newspaper, having a circulation of 89,855 copies every Friday morning before breakfast. And then it has a picture of Siegfried on the bottom. Reminding you of your Friday luncheon engagement. The speaker is Siegfried Henry Ernest Wagner, one-time member of the German Reichstag, listens to German shortwave radio programs at a cabin near Estes Park, and analyzes propaganda in the Chicago Times column understands 7 languages, and is known as the Hermit of Horse Creek. His subject is the war on the airwaves. Members Council in Denver Chamber of Commerce, February 28th. This is a big one. We're listening. We're listening. War on the Airwaves by Siegfried Wagner. Times Listening Post, Allens Park, Colorado, October 10th. 3 years ago today, the Times began a project unheard of in newspaper history by running a column analyzing and reporting the anti-democratic radio propaganda. In those days, the majority of the newspaper editors throughout the country believed that propaganda, shortwave or otherwise, was worth printing only if it was with news with a capital N. But today it is an accepted fact that the enemy propaganda must be fought, and many communities even have rumor clinics. The Times has done a consistent job of it ever since the war started in 1939, World War II. When the Times Listening Post work started, after the preliminary work in January 1939, the only American shortwave listening posts in America were those of the radio networks, were those like NBC, CBS. None of these analyzed what they heard. They were used primarily to scoop the press with news items they picked from the air. Even Princeton University Listening Center, which trained many men now in government service, did not materialize until months after the Times Post was in full swing. The federal government depended on private sources for its information about enemy propaganda. As soon as operations permitted, the Times Listening Post volunteered its services to the government, and since has furnished regularly information to the State Department, the Federal Communications Commission, the Office of Information, other government agencies which have made use of the material gathered at the Times Listening Post are the War Department, the U.S. Maritime Commission, and the FBI. So they're all depending on Siegfried. As the Times readers may recall, this observer helped the FBI in the spring of 1940 to chase a Nazi radio program off the air in Hammond, Indiana. Running a battery of shortwave receivers, calibrating them so that stations 5,000 and more miles away could be tuned in at will, was only part of the work. In order to analyze the real motives behind the enemy propaganda, a knowledge of foreign languages was needed. I knew a few and picked up a few more while listening. It was necessary to make speedy and accurate translations, so I trained myself to write all my notes in English regardless of the language of the broadcast. Of course, the most valuable tool in analyzing propaganda is a thorough knowledge of the mentality and characteristics of the European peoples. Having gone through World War I and the revolution in Germany, this knowledge was mine firsthand. Close analysis of the enemy shortwave broadcast pointed to the Russian-German War 13 months before it happened, to the disintegration of the Italian morale several months before authenticated reports proved it so. Work like that of the Times Listening Post has become one of the most important war functions of the press and the radio and the government. So this is my Siegfried owned all the property on the top of the Rockies, and then my grandmother took care of him. And then when he died, he left the property to my grandmother. And then she found all these boxes of papers, and I found these in her garage. But here's a letter from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Director of Development, September 24th, 1982. Mrs. Betty S. Mapes. Corpus Christi, which is Body of Christ, Texas. Dear Miss Mapes, the Library of the University of Colorado Boulder has informed us of your recent gift of 11 additional boxes of Siegfried Wagner papers, making a total of approximately 12 cubic feet of Mr. Wagner's personal papers. Gifts in kind are an important source of support to our university, and we are most grateful for your generosity. On behalf of the entire university community, please accept my sincere thanks. C. Dean Graves, Director of Development, University of Colorado. Here's another one. University of Colorado Boulder, University Libraries, Western Historical Collections, June 17th, 1982. Miss Betty Strickland Mapes. Dear Miss Mapes, this letter acknowledges belatedly but with sincere gratitude your generous gift to this repository. I am referring to the 11 additional boxes of Siegfried Wagner papers delivered by President Waldrop several weeks after my December 14, 1981 letter to you acknowledging his initial delivery of the Wagner papers. The entire gift includes approximately 12 cubic feet of personal papers generated by an interesting, strong-willed individual who migrated to the American West. The materials include personal letters, published book reviews, and drafts of philosophical writings, book manuscripts, business correspondence, newspaper clippings, scrapbooks, photographs, and assorted memorabilia. His experiences during the years between the two world wars are particularly well documented. Really. It is good that this record of his unrest and his thoughtful life is being preserved at this institution. As I mentioned, this is a splendid gift. Thank you. Sincerely, John A. Brunneman, Assistant Professor, Curator at the University of Colorado Boulder. This is a letter from the White House. The White House, Washington, D.C., July 15, 1941. Personal. Dear Mr. Wagner, the President was very glad to embrace the opportunity to listen to your broadcast on propaganda analysis. He asked me to assure you that he was very much interested in what you said and liked the program very much. Very sincerely yours, Stephen Early, Secretary to the President. Okay, here's another ad for Siegfried. Right here. It's got both sides. Siegfried Wagner, Detective of the Airwaves, Soldier, Author, Adventurer, available now. Siegfried Wagner is the only commentator of the airwaves to have his own shortwave listening post atop the Rocky Mountain Peak, now brings you in dramatic ringside story of the poison in the air. President Roosevelt, the British government, educators, and newspapers have acclaimed Wagner's unique wartime service to America, acting as a monitor, a listener, translator, and analyst all in one. He electrified millions with his accounts of diabolic warfare waged by our enemies on the shortwave radio. Says Time of his patriotic service, Time magazine. His material packs a wallop and is derived from a source that even Goebbels should hardly object to, shortwave propaganda broadcast from Germany. Wagner in his secluded receiving station 8,500 feet high in the Rockies heard secrets of the Axis not intended for American ears. He'll tell you how our foes undermine the morale of other countries, use cajolery, bribery, and threats to weaken America. For 4.5 years he siphoned off the poison from the airwaves and told Americans what we were up against. Now, hear him personally after his return to the 10-month mission to Europe for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, before the CIA. There's poison in the air, a gripping account of what Mr. Wagner single-handedly sleuthing the airwaves to track down the Axis propaganda. Will Germany behave? A candid appraisal of Germans by a man who knew them well under various regimes. The enemy dies hard. With the defeat of Nazism, we must be prepared to cope with fascism in as many guises for long years after World War II has ended. Gripping, authoritative, timely, 120 radio stations, scores of newspapers have carried his